Well, staying with the party, ANC leaders are meeting this week to find a suitable partner to form a national government. The DA has also appointed a team of senior members to engage in discussions with other political parties regarding coalitions at national and provincial levels, including discussions with the ANC. However, ANC NEC member Lindiwe Sisulu has warned against a partnership with the DA. Sisulu's statements, as you've just heard, come amidst a growing speculation about a possible ANC-DA coalition following the ANC's poor performance in the recent national elections. Now, let's discuss this with a local governance research associate at University of Johannesburg. Dr. Thina Nzo joins us now. Thank you so much for your time, Dr. Nzo. So I'd like us to first explore liberation movements, on the continent. As in the case of the African National Congress, the 112-year-old party managed to be in power in this country for the past 30 years. And for the first time since 1994, of course, the ANC dropped in numbers to below 50% in these elections, which also had the lowest turnover. Perhaps let's start with how liberation movements continue to lose power and where the ANC is at the moment.
Good afternoon, Onati, and also good afternoon to your viewers. One of the things that I've been, talking about with some of my colleagues, especially around our community who has been analyzing the phenomena of the ANC losing power in these elections, is that we need to read the ANC within the context of it being a post-liberation movement, and a post-liberation movement that is in Africa that has similar characteristics of other liberation movements in the SADC region and throughout the continent. Now, remember, the post-liberation movements that took power, they took power post the 1960s. For example, Kwame Nkrumah's party like CPO, which took power in the 1960s, followed by Kanu Kenyatta and various other parties. Over time, these political parties have had to start thinking about taking the project of nation building, state building, and also institutional building and driving their socio-economic developments. Now, unfortunately, these liberation movements have struggled, to take those kinds of developmental trajectories forward, particularly in the SADC region. And this is one of the reasons why some of them ended up actually losing power over time, and also getting into coalition formations with some of the opposition parties, while also resisting, to get into these formations at the same time. For example, if we look at what happened with the ZANU-PF, where it started to use violence to stay in power. So in this trajectory, we find that, for example, even in Zambia, Kenneth Kaunda's party, lost power in 1991, and it had to struggle in between forming a government with 4 other political parties, and they've been shifting powers throughout that, that political regime. So what we are trying to show here is that there's nothing new about what's happening with the ANC. It was inevitably going to come, but right now we have to look at the way in which other liberation parties in the African continent have been able to work collaboratively with opposition parties who come into power and have to share power with other smaller political parties moving forward.
Now, of course, you would have been hearing, different narratives around the formation of coalitions in this country, even before, the elections took place. And it would seem that, some of these talks are layered with fear. Perhaps because of what we are seeing in local government, in as far as how those coalition governments have failed, to deliver services to vulnerable people. When we start talking about coalitions, you mentioned other successful, countries that have gone through the same journey, whether successfully or they failed, but they've tried at least, to enter into those coalitions, Zambia being one of them, as you've said. What then do we have to look at when we start to engage on these coalition talks? Some people are giving various scenarios. If the ANC were to partner with the DA, that would be more suitable for markets. And then they could give another, broad stroke example, as Lindiwe Sisulu there said, of, black parties rather being the best solution for the country. Just your take on the narrative that you are hearing in as far as coalition is concerned.
The one factor that we have to take into consideration is, the mediation between political parties in avoidance to actually, embed ourselves in the problematic areas that we have in our politics, divisional politics that are based on regionalism, ethnic divisions, and also, partisan divisions, where you find that political parties are actually getting into power agreements so that they can control certain sectors and cleavages in societies. So we need to avoid that as possible as we can. And then secondly, for me, what is most important out of these coalition agreements is that we should also try to desist from embedding them on patronage. The understanding that in order for you to get, a partnership formation, it has to be based on what kind of spoils, a certain party is going to get if it goes into an executive, government, out of government, the government of national unity. And then lastly, for me, it's the national interest. So, for example, what we have seen with local government is that, if you don't find stabilities and points of cohesion that are directed towards the socio-economic development interests of that geographical location, which will be a city in the case of South Africa, where we have had coalitions being formed in city of Joburg, the city of Tshwane, and they ended up being unstable. It has a ramification on the stability, on the confidence of business investments, and also the confidence of the citizens. So with us, we have got national interests, to think about our macroeconomic policies. We've got to think about our pro-poor policies that need to, to show a state of continuity. And in that case, we need political parties to think of an intervention program that is centered on the developmental interests of South Africa, rather than these small little power in cleavages that most political parties will want, to proliferate out of these agreements. So those are the fundamental principles while we're shifting towards an issue-based, policy-based national interest agreements that would come forward from these engagements.
And just having said that, and contextualizing, of course, some of the thinking behind what the best solution is for the country. Former president, of the country, and the ANC president, Thabo Mbeki, mentioned the need, to host a national dialogue. Just having spoken, about the essence of just nationalization, what then do you say of the ANC today saying that it is considering a government of national unity? Would that then be, the solution, and how would that look like? Very briefly, if you can, Dr. Nzo.
This is a process that needs to be thoroughly thought through, Unathi, because if you're going to have very radical, demands being made by certain political parties, for example, who want to push forward, ideas such as nationalizing the banks or nationalizing the reserve bank, and nationalizing certain SOEs in the country, fully. That will have a ripple effect. This is what I'm talking about. It will have a ripple effect or ramification on our macroeconomic standing, because remember, South Africa is sitting on a minus, balance sheet when it comes to our borrowings. And that will have a ripple effect in the way in which other institutions, international institutions, will start becoming jittery, because our policies are not policies that are steered towards the nationalization of, resources in this country, but the regulation of our national resources. And we've got debts to pay. So these are the kinds of negotiations that have to be thought very carefully, rather than driven by very sentimental, political pointers that certain political parties want to use as their leverage in entering into power. So my suggestion is that we need to think carefully about the national interests of this country. We need to find a way in which we can reconcile these national interests that are not going to have the greatest impact on our economic development, but also looking at our pro-poor policies and the kind of reforms that we still need to take forward in this country.